Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you guys. Sorry for the 2 in 1 day. You know, it's a lot of maintenance, but we'll get through it. How was everybody's day?
So.
So?
Yep.
I'm with you. My daughter is schooling from home right now with the COVID situation, which for a 5-year-old mostly means, you know, wanting snacks and begging for TV, and it's fun. There's a lot of there's a lot less productivity than normal. I'll say it that way.
I have a question for you, Dr. Amy. Do you have, is it available to watch or listen to your earlier meeting today?
The Q&A, not yet, mostly because of the lack of productivity. It will be. Fingers crossed it'll be tomorrow.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure, or just wondered if I could, go back and listen. Okay.
Yeah, for sure you will be able to, but it'll be tomorrow.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Perfect. My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, I'm happy to see everybody. This is great. It's fun. Should we get started, or should we give people another couple of minutes? Let's give people another couple of minutes, just because I thought I turned off the waiting room, but I apparently didn't. Hold on, let me see. Let me see if there's a way to turn off the waiting room. I have disabled the waiting room. Okay, so now everybody can come and go without notification, and it won't interrupt things. Okay, so in that case, let's get started. Let's just do this. Guys, it's more talk about food tonight. I know you're getting tired of it. We're all getting tired of it, but food is the foundation of this journey. If you can do the food, you've mostly nailed it. So this will be the last one about food. After this, we'll get on to other stuff. So let's do this thing. Let me share my screen here. Okay, hold on just a second. I made the mistake of erasing and reinstalling my hard drive.
Oh.
So now nothing works. I know, this was a horrible decision. Theoretically, it was a good thing, but practically, nope, I'm not finding it to be that. Back in business. So sorry, guys. So theoretically, we're good. Sorry about that.
As soon as I can get this up for Thomas.
All right. So let's get going. I'm going to share my screen. Fingers crossed this works. Yes, looks like it's going to work this time. All right. So today, I really, really want to talk about eating for your genes, right? So there's a million fad diets out there, probably more than a million. Everybody's got one. They're all like the rage and the best thing for you. And it's suddenly this great big new health advance and blah, blah, blah. But we all have an individual genome, and we actually should respect that, right? Like there is no one size fits all diet, and diets become fads because they work for a small segment of the population, but everybody else, not so much, right? Probably the reason that they work for that small segment of the population is because for whatever reason, that diet integrates well with whatever those people's genome is doing. So skip all that. We're just going to learn to eat for our genes. So this week we're going to talk about the MTHFR food plan, and then I promise I'll let it go. I do just really want to emphasize that this is the foundation, right? Like this is genuinely the best way to take care of yourself with MTHFR. All of the supplements, all of the other stuff are kind of the icing, but this is the cake. I do want to talk about what to eat if you don't eat wheat, because that's kind of a huge commitment. And I'm not anti-wheat. I do want to be clear with that. I personally am gluten sensitive, so I can't eat wheat, but I would love for you to be able to, right? Like enjoy that croissant, really get into it. Tell me about it. I miss them. So it's not that I'm against wheat. It's just that we have to be so careful with fortified foods. And honestly, best policy here is avoidance. I do want to go over some more food sources of natural folate and really make sure everybody knows what to actually add into their diet. Also, quickie food substitutions, protein intake, because this really matters for MTHFR. And I think culturally we tend to be heading in a really high protein direction if we're not there already. And so I just want to talk about kind of reining that in and why it matters for us. And then also dive a little bit deeper into the difference between some of the forms of folate, because it gets super confusing and weird. So we'll also talk about folate alternatives for people who don't tolerate it well, because there are plenty of those people, and dosing strategies, because with MTHFR, it's never a simple, like, this is my dose for the rest of my life. No, would that it could be, but it's not. So we'll get into that. So food is genuinely the biggest thing with MTHFR. No matter what else, do the food. I think I've said that 28 times now, so I'll drop it. So this is not a diet per se, right? Like the only outcome goals we're looking for here is actually allowing your methylation cycle to function in a normal way. Because with a standard American diet, it probably doesn't, right? It almost definitely doesn't. So it's really simple to talk about, but this actually represents a really fundamental shift in how you approach food, especially those of you who are tuning in from North America, because we tend to design every meal around like the carb center of it, right? And the carb center of it is 99% of the time enriched carbs, like, you know, bread or pasta or whatever. If you can avoid foods fortified with folic acid, which is wheat flour and in some instances corn flour in the US is becoming more fortified, simply because they found there was a demographic in the population that they were really missing in terms of fortification with wheat flour. And then, so if you can avoid those foods and add in food sources of natural folate, as long as you tolerate it well. There is a small handful of people who just don't tolerate folate in any form, and that includes natural food sources. For those people, we have to just work around the MTHFR enzyme. We're never going to get there directly with folate. So that's why symptom trackers matter, because if you're using your symptom tracker and you start really ramping up the food sources of folate and notice that symptoms are getting worse, then that's great feedback for you, and it'll help to clarify your path moving forward. It's not common to not be able to tolerate food sources of folate, but it certainly happens. It's within the realm of possibility. And so we have to watch for that. Also, avoiding food-based toxins is a lot more important with MTHFR than it is with a more sort of genotypical picture. That's like artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners. Please God, avoid those for so many reasons. Food additives in general, and to the degree that you can, pesticides and herbicides. So yeah, we just, you know, the detox thing is an issue for us. And our detox tends to get stuck pretty quickly. It gets log jammed. And so the more you can allow detox to happen and the fewer things you put into your body that need to be detoxed, the better it's going to go overall, right? And then also balance your protein. Paleo is not the diet for us, right? Like the ancestral diet, the paleo diet, the keto diet, the blah, 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 Atkins, you know, any of these, like, I eat only meat. Yeah, no, Please don't. Please don't. It's not going to go well. So avoiding fortified foods doesn't mean that you have to avoid wheat, but avoiding wheat is one of the easiest ways to actually avoid fortified foods, right? Like that, it's sort of a cheat, right? And a hack, because it allows you to actually get to that same place without having to read every label for whether it's fortified or not. Although you do have to be cognizant of whether there's wheat in it or not. So it takes some retraining for lunch to not automatically be a sandwich, right? Like, especially if you pack a lunch to go somewhere, what most people pack is a sandwich, right? Like, and every now and then there's a Buddha bowl or a bento box, but really mostly it's a sandwich. So, so it kind of takes some relearning. And when I eliminated wheat, it was actually for a totally different reason. I eliminated wheat before I knew that I had an MTHFR issue, also by accident. It seems like all of my big health, strides forward happened by accident, but that's a story for a different time. But when I eliminated wheat, I had no idea what to make into meals. And so I worked out this menu of like 2 different lunches and 2 different breakfasts and 2 different dinners. And that was how I started, right? Like, okay, I know I can do these things, so I'll just eat this until I figure out something else, right? Like, it was not the most adventurous diet. But what I did find was, without all that wheat, there was a whole lot of room in there for like actual food content, right? That wasn't wheat. Like, there were all these more vegetables just coming in naturally because I had to fill a plate, right? And so the wheat wasn't there. So what else you got? Start with a few basic recipes and build from there, right? Like, just get a few things that you can tolerate, sit well with you, that are okay. And likewise, when you're adding high folate foods, do the same things, right? Because if it's not your go-to foods, then, you kind of have to sort of work your way through it slowly. But don't worry, it's not all lettuce and tofu. It's hardly any lettuce and tofu, actually. So in terms of food sources of natural folate, okay, keep it simple. Chances are a lot of these foods are in your diet anyway. Just try and boost them and keep rough track of how much folate you're getting. And you don't have to do that like for the rest of your life. No, forget about it. I just want you to kind of get a feel for it so that you know roughly how much is coming in, right? If you don't feel like doing that part, that's fine. Just eat more lentils and see how you feel, right? Like, do you feel okay with high folate foods? Because that's actually the most important thing. What we're trying to do is figure out how your body tolerates the natural folate sources and how you're feeling. It's not going to be a night and day shift for most people unless you're genuinely a non-tolerator, and then, it might be not so good, a night and day shift. But great natural folate sources, beans and pulses. So like lentils, any kind of bean, white beans, black beans, whatever, chickpeas, those are fantastic food sources of folate. They have the added benefit of being really high fiber. So it's kind of, nutritionally a double whammy. Edamame, which are soybeans as well, but we don't tend to think of them as beans. Asparagus are great. Spinach and any sort of dark green leafy is pretty high in folate. Broccoli and other brassica vegetables. So the brassica family is all the cruciferous vegetables. So it has broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and kale and Brussels sprouts. And I'm probably missing one. Doesn't matter. Avocados, which makes me happy, right? If there's avocados on the list, I am there. Marmite and Vegemite, not commonly eaten in North America, but a really, really interesting product. It's a yeast extract, and the first nutritional studies on folate were actually done on Marmite, I believe, because the researcher was a British woman who was in India studying pregnancy outcomes between women who had a reasonably high amount of folate in their diet, and she did that through Marmite, versus women who did not, and with like a typical Indian diet, right? Because in that time, folate deficiency was a much bigger problem in pregnancies, and they were seeing a lot more neural tube defects and that sort of thing. And so the earliest research on folate, although it didn't have a name at that point, was by this woman studying pregnant women in India with Marmite. So yeah, for the North Americans, Marmite and Vegemite are not usually a part of the typical diet. But if you develop a taste for them, they're so good. Like, so good. I eat a ton of Marmite. Mangoes, oranges, and tropical fruits, and that's quite nice. Orange juice, you do have to be careful of, like, so orange juice naturally, if you juice it from the oranges, does have a good source of natural folate in it. But orange juice, if you buy it in a carton, very often is fortified because God knows why. I don't know. They try to make everything look better with a better nutritional label, right? Like, look, it has all this stuff in it. But the point is, if it's a natural source of folate, like if it's actually coming from the orange itself, they can't guarantee the amount. So they can't actually put that on a nutrition label. So any of the nutrients that are inherent to that product, unless it's a macronutrient like protein or fiber or whatever, is not on the label. It's not on the label, right? The only things on the label are things they've added. So just be aware of that, unless they can guarantee stability. So something like iron sometimes is on the label because it's stable. It's going to be stable. It's not breaking down anywhere. It's not degrading. Folate breaks down very fast. And so they can't guarantee the amount, and legally to put it on a nutrition label, they have to be able to guarantee an amount. So the only way they can do that is with folic acid, which is a crystalline form. And in that situation, they can guarantee the amount. So if folate is on the label, be very suspicious to the point of avoiding that product. So be more than suspicious, just avoid it. Also things like lettuce and sweet corn. So hopefully you're seeing a couple of foods on this list that are like normal things you eat, right? They're just food, right? Like this isn't something you have to work at, you know, introducing like suddenly all I eat is durian fruit and whatever. Yeah, no, it's a little more normal than that. Some of my personal substitution favorites. So the things that I really missed, like chips and crunchy salty, not that I eat so many of them, but when you want something crunchy salty, you really want something crunchy salty. So also I was living in Texas at that time. You can't get away from corn chips. So Beanitos are amazing. They're bean chips. And now there's other brands of bean chips as well. I just don't know the names of them, but Beanitos are the best thing since sliced bread. They're so good. Pasta, there's a million great options, like rice pasta, brown rice pasta, gluten-free pasta. All of those are super easy to find and in almost every grocery store. Like I technically live in quite a small town, but even my grocery store has those things, right? Also, if you're really going for the extra nutrition, like gold star, spiralized zucchini is a great noodle substitute. It does have more liquid in it than a conventional noodle. So like when I make lasagna, I use a layer of just thin sliced zucchini instead of noodles, which I love, but it adds more liquid to the recipe. So it ends up a little bit like more liquidy unless you plan for that. Spaghetti squash, great. All of these good options. Bread. So if you can with bread, try not to go directly for a substitution, right? It's so tempting, right? Because, you know, like bread's what I eat. Bread is my staple. But if you go right for the substitution, then it leaves a lot of that plate full, if that makes any sense, right? Like it doesn't leave you as much wiggle room to really add in nutrient dense foods to your diet. There are good substitutions, of course, right? So gluten-free bread is not fortified. Organic bread is not fortified generally. Can't be actually because folic acid is not organic. There's alternative grain breads, you know, that are reasonably common, like 100% rye is typically 100% rye. They don't fortify it. They don't have to. And there's more and more alternative grain breads. Also, in a lot of cases, sprouted bread is not fortified because you can't like sprout the wheat and then fortify it. It just doesn't work out. Although occasionally they slip it in as like an added bonus, right? Yay, we're looking out for your health. Baked goods, everybody under the sun makes gluten-free baked goods, so they're really easy to find. The price point is not so great, right? Like gluten-free baked goods cost about twice, maybe 3 times what a conventional baked good would cost. Making them at home works out really well if you're into that sort of thing. In terms of flour substitutes, I mean, there's 1.5 million baking mixes. They're not cheap either. So what I do is grind my own rice flour, which sounds super hippie and like I wear a long skirt and a turban possibly while I do this, but honestly, I just put it in my blender. Like it's not that, it's not quite as weird as it sounds, but it does make it super affordable in terms of like actually using that flour on a regular basis. And I have a kiddo, so, you know, I probably make more cookies and brownies and that sort of thing than average. But yeah, so, I mean, it is decent in terms of substitutions. And of course, there's the convenience factor in terms of just buying gluten-free things. It just, you pay for that, right? Okay, so here's a thing I hear a lot. Amy, you're freaking me out and I can't do this. Okay, that's okay, right? Like that's actually an okay place to be. Just take it at your own pace because you've kind of got to feel ready when you do this, right? If it's coming because I'm telling you to do it, it's not going to last. You're not going to like it. It's going to suck, basically. But if you get to a point with your health where it's worth it to you, that's the time to do this. That is the time. If you can't do the diet part, I mean, that really is okay. Watch out for other sources of folic acid, like definitely take it out of your vitamins, take it out of your supplements, do all of those things. If you're not ready for the diet, you're just not ready. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like the diet is hard. It's hard when you're getting started. Super easy once you've got it figured out. But when you're getting started, it takes a commitment and you've got to have the bandwidth for that. Also, I do want to point out that right now we're in a pandemic. And so everybody's bandwidth, like if you had this much before, now you have like this much, because it is actually a global crisis. And, you know, I've had so many clients who say, you know, I don't know why, but my anxiety is really high right now. Or, you know, I just can't figure it out. My sleep was doing really well, but it's backtracking. Yeah, okay, so global pandemic is actually a situation of threat, right? Whether you particularly are under threat or not, that matters psychologically, right? We are a kind of a human organism and we are very interconnected. If there is a high level of anxiety and tension around you, yeah, you're gonna pick up on that. You're gonna notice. If that level remains high ongoing for almost a year now, yeah, you're gonna notice, right? Cut yourself some slack for that. That's kind of a good human trait, and not really a problem. So, you know, if the middle of a pandemic isn't the time when you want to take that on, that is completely reasonable. Okay, so adding more natural folate. I mean, yeah, the majority of MTHFR folks do tolerate food sources of folate to some degree, but most people tolerate without a problem. There are still some total non-tolerators. Usually these fall into the category of low serotonin undermethylators. And when they eat food sources of folate, it tanks them mood-wise. So usually what I see if somebody's not going to tolerate folate in foods is depression, right? And actually for those people, getting the folic acid out of their diet helps the depression anyway, because for most people, they've been eating folic acid in their diet their whole life, right? Like their food has always been fortified with folic acid. So they've never had the opportunity to actually see what they feel like without it. So if you don't tolerate natural folate, it's a really good chance that getting that folic acid out of your diet is going to make a world of difference. Just an aside. So this week, if you're following along with the food part, then we're going to focus on adding in good food sources of natural folate. If you're not doing the food part, that's okay too. You've got it when you're ready. So this like MTHFR breakfast, super easy. An avocado is 160 micrograms, a cup of fresh OJ, and that is fresh squeezed, not like canistered, whatever, 150 micrograms. Already you've got 310 micrograms of natural folate, and that's, you know, before the day's even started. So it's not actually that difficult, right? And frankly, avocado toast is like the best thing ever. You just have to find a bread to put it on. Okay, avoid food-based toxins. There's not a lot I'm going to say about this other than if you can't pronounce it or if it has more than 4 syllables, it really isn't food. Just don't eat it, right? Like it's not worth it. It's totally not worth it. And it's more for your body to do. So next week, we're going to talk all about detox, but one of my favorite examples of the ways food is misused in our culture is aspartame, right? So artificial sweetener, aspartame, it's fallen out of favor mostly because of this problem, but aspartame is entirely legal to sell, to put in foods, to use as a sweetener, right? Like this has been approved by the FDA. Aspartame, when it goes through phase 1 detox of your liver, converts directly to formaldehyde, which is not actually something that anybody should ingest, right? I mean, it's just not something you should put in your body on purpose ever. Even by accident, it would be better to avoid that. So in spite of the fact that aspartame converts directly to formaldehyde, it's still entirely legal. Now, for people who have any trouble clearing formaldehyde or any toxin buildup or any, you know, issues with their liver generally, that's a bunch of formaldehyde floating around in their system, causing God knows what havoc, right? But still, that's a totally legal food additive to sell. That's crazy, right? That's crazy to me. That just doesn't make sense. So yeah, don't eat aspartame, but also be very wary of things that are approved for us to eat, right? Because I mean, that shows a pretty negligent level of actual testing on humans. Well, it didn't kill the first batch you ate it, so yes, fine. Show that in there, no problem. Okay, just wanted to mention that. So I do want to talk about protein, because yeah, I mean, who doesn't have jerky in their purse at this very moment, right? Like this is the staple right now, I feel like, of every health conscious person's diet plan right now, because we're all focusing on like getting more protein and getting good protein, and we've got too many carbs, we need more protein. Okay, actually for us, we don't. So if you've ever been on a weight loss diet, you've probably eaten high protein and low carbs. It's not bad for weight loss. I mean, in short term for us, it's probably fine, but it is not a good long-term diet for MTHFR. It just doesn't work out. Proteins like meat, eggs, nuts, seeds, dairy, and fish are really good sources of methionine, which is essential and we need it, but it converts to homocysteine, right? And this is part of the methionine cycle, which you will notice here. Oh, do I have a mouse? I don't. Which you'll notice uses MTHFR to recycle homocysteine back to methionine. This cycle needs to spin for us to be healthy. And if homocysteine is building up, it's actually a big health problem. If you've been listening to the podcast, these last maybe 4 weeks have been all about homocysteine and what it does in your system and whatever. But homocysteine is one of the only markers for MTHFR that doctors actually pay attention to. And it's considered to be a cardiac risk factor. Among other things, it's also a risk factor for miscarriage. It's a risk factor for Alzheimer's and other forms of cognitive decline and dementia. It's a risk factor for lots of things. So homocysteine. So as we get more methionine in our diet, which is coming truly from those protein sources, it has to convert to SAMe. Now, SAMe is S-adenosyl methionine, right? Which is the active form of methionine. which has that methyl group, right? So it's methylated into SAMe, and then SAMe acts as our methyl donor, right? So SAMe is super necessary, and that's actually like the big end product of this whole cycle, and that's the thing that's really most biologically active. And so SAMe is how we methylate a lot of, I mean, almost everything actually, like genes, lipids. When we methylate toxins, a lot of times it's from SAMe, sometimes other places, but so we use SAMe a lot. We need that methionine coming in to generate the SAMe. What we don't need is a flood of it so that we end up with high homocysteine levels. Homocysteine is still necessary, and I do want to point that out, right? Homocysteine is something that we do need because in one pathway, it goes to alpha ketobutyrate, which is one of the basic sort of pieces in terms of our cellular energy cycle, which is like the Krebs cycle, right? And in the other direction, it goes to glutathione, which is our master antioxidant. We need both of those desperately. So it's not that homocysteine is a bad thing. It's that unbalanced homocysteine is a bad thing, and too much homocysteine is a bad thing. And then using MTHFR, we recycle the homocysteine back to methionine. This is a very stripped down version of it. I'm missing, you know, like 60% of the steps. But through all of this, that wheel keeps kind of turning around and cogs into some of the other cycles, right? So like folate recycling and all of this, it's all happening with, in tandem with this cycle. So homocysteine levels in the blood are directly linked to negative health outcomes, right? Cardiac disease, Alzheimer's, repeat miscarriages, migraines. Also, there's a recent study that shows that high homocysteine is linked to a worse prognosis with COVID-19 and a higher mortality rate. So yeah, that matters. That's relevant right now. The other thing that I want to touch on and then leave very quickly is don't eat sugar alone. And this has very, well, a little bit to do with MTHFR, but more just with being a human. By this, I mean, make sure that your sugary and starchy foods have plenty of fiber, good fats, proteins, complex carbs to balance them out. That is because MTHFR predisposes us to susceptibility to blood sugar issues. But honestly, every human should do this, right? Like eating sugar alone. So like getting a big gulp of soda and nothing else is almost the worst thing you can do for your health. There's other worse things, but it's one of the worst things you can do for your health. Basically because there's nothing to balance out that sugar, right? Like all you are getting is sugar. In excellent news, this means it's better for you to have like a beautiful slice of rich chocolate cake with, say, you know, buttercream frosting or a nice ice cream than it is to have a soda. So, you know, enjoy the cake. That's what I'm saying. All right, let's talk folate. So we do want natural folate from food. But if that's not enough, then we can get into supplementation. Now, I do want to point out that there is some folinic acid in food sources, especially in something like the yeast extract, like the Marmite or Vegemite, that actually has some folinic acid in it, but it's a lot more rare. And mostly in food, we have this variety of natural folates that fall under the umbrella called folate, right? But it's all of these different versions and all of these different molecules that we just sort of lump under that category. So in terms of benefits and drawbacks of these two, these are the two supplements that are actually acceptable in terms of folate supplements for MTHFR folks. 5-LMTHF, which is the activated form of folate. Like this is the end product. You don't do anything else to it. This is exactly how your body needs it to be active. Does actually bypass the MTHFR gene or enzyme, which is great, right? Like that's excellent. And so it sounds like we all should be taking that one, but it can be really hard to tolerate for some people. So yeah, that's okay, right? If you can't take that one, folinic acid does not bypass the MTHFR enzyme. So it still needs to go through the enzyme, but it goes through in much the same way as the natural folate from foods. And so, and it does not jam up the enzyme in the same way that folic acid does. So it's still acceptable. Are they active in the brain? So the 5-LMTHF is active in the brain. There is evidence that it does cross the blood-brain barrier and increase brain levels of folate. Folinic acid, not as much, not as much. Easy to tolerate. So the 5-LMTHF, not as much, right? The people who do not tolerate it really do not tolerate it. It's not fun. It's not fun at all. Folinic acid is very easy to tolerate, and almost everybody tolerates it well. Again, there are some total non-tolerators, but those people are more rare. And for most of us, folinic acid is pretty easy. If I don't tolerate folates in food, should I try 5-LMTHF? Yeah, no, you're going to regret that. Just don't. Save yourself that trouble. If you don't tolerate folates in food, you can still cautiously try folinic acid because it is far easier to tolerate than a lot of forms of folate. Because basically, we metabolize it into that 5-LMTHF slowly, right? So it gets there in tiny, tiny little trickles instead of in a big lump sum. Whereas if you take the 5-LMTHF, you've got this big giant influx of active folate and your body goes like, ah, right? Because it's never had that. So yeah, so 5-LMTHF can be a little tricky. So here's the whole cycle. Sorry guys, I do love my cycles. This is what happens, it's geekery. So if you're looking at this, the little things in the colored squares are your 4 different types of folate, right? Folic acid, which is a no-no, I don't like. Natural folate from foods, folinic acid, and 5-MTHF. And this is kind of where they come into this cycle and which enzymes they have to go through to get to the 5-MTHF. The folic acid is the crystalline shelf-stable manufactured form of folate. This is from supplements, right? Vitamin supplements and fortified foods. If you cannot put it through DHF, so it has to go through an enzyme called MTHFR, which is very, very slow. If it cannot go through DHFR in a timely manner, it actually stays in your bloodstream as something called UMFA, unmetabolized folic acid. This is actually a toxin, right? Like, so this is a toxic substance in your body. This is a problem for MTHFR folks especially, but also for more genetically typical folks, because let's face it, we get a ton of folic acid, right? If we're eating a fortified diet and also taking vitamin supplements, we get a ton of this. So unmetabolized folic acid is actually a problem for everybody. It's been shown in research to be linked to cancers, to be linked to all-cause mortality, to be linked to cardiac situations. So like this is actually a real problem, and not just for us, but especially for us. So folic acid goes through this slow DHFR. It's the only form of folate that has to go through that one, and it really does actually slow the system down. Natural folate from food sources comes in at DHFR fast, right? And that enzyme is a normal enzyme, it just happens quickly, right? It's not a big deal. And so these are some of the sources of folate that you actually want. Gets converted to tetrahydrofolate, then 10-formal THF, then 5-10-methanol THF, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And at this point is where folinic acid is coming in. So it's a little further down on the cycle than natural folate, but it still has to go through that MTHFR enzyme at the bottom. And you'll notice the gray boxes are the different enzymes that these things are going through. I didn't put every enzyme on the list because really it doesn't matter, right? Like the ones that I'm talking about are the ones that, well, the ones that I put on the picture are the ones where we actually have issues. Most of the other ones are totally fine. And so the folinic acid is coming in here closer to the end. Then as it goes through the conversions, there at the bottom, we see the MTHFR and the end product of MTHFR. Once the whatever form of folate has gone through all the way down to there, it gets to 5-MTHF. And this is from supplements and from prescriptions or from this pathway. But that is the active form. That's the biologically active form. And so that's the form that we can actually do things with. So for a lot of people, when they take a giant dose of that in a supplement or in a pill, if their body has been like trickling down this little pathway and getting these tiny little doses, and then all of a sudden you throw this giant freaking load of this stuff at it, it's a bit of a shock to the system, right? And it feels like a shock to the system. So if you've never taken 5-MTHF, it can feel very odd, right? And that's pretty normal. For people who tolerate it, the oddness goes away pretty quickly. For people who don't tolerate it, yeah, no, it just gets worse. So it's really important to keep a symptom tracker when you are starting. And it's important to pay attention to your body and listen to your body, right? Like, and really be aware of what's happening. Don't just power through. This is not a power through situation, like where, okay, I'll just keep taking it, it's going to get better. You know, it might not. It really might not. So don't power through that one. So again, it's like a fast versus slow scenario, right? So the 5-MTHF is already there. There's no conversion needed. It's the definition of fast, right? Like you just use it as it comes in. You use it as you get it. The folinic acid still has to go through some conversions, so it's a little bit slower. It's going to trickle out. With the 5-MTHF, it's much more likely to cause side effects. And for most people that I've worked with who have side effects, that's like jittery, almost like a drugged sort of energy where you just, it's, you know, you can't calm down, physically cannot stop yourself. Restless, anxious, irritable, some form of just like crazy. With the folinic acid, it's a lot less likely to do that, right? It's much gentler, much slower, may not reach your brain as well, right? Like it may not cross the blood-brain barrier as well. There is some interconversion, obviously, right? And so hopefully some 5-MTHF is still getting in there, but that's a legitimate concern in some situations. So if you find you do great with high folate foods, right? Like you feel well with high folate foods, you tolerate them great, then potentially you're on a track to try 5-MTHF. If you don't do great with high folate foods, yeah, maybe not, right? You could try a tiny dose of folinic acid. And depending on the results of that, you can stick with folinic acid or start to try folate alternatives. So if you don't do well with folate, if you need folate alternatives, the things that are usually the most helpful are methionine or SAMe, specifically for the methylation cycle. Because SAMe, like methionine and SAMe, you'll remember, are kind of the beginnings of that methylation cycle. They're very much the same. So taking both is not really a productive strategy, but one or the other. And for most of us, it's SAMe, but SAMe is also quite excitatory. And so it can also be a little bit much for some people. So methionine or SAMe, and then also some serotonin support. So most of the people that I see who really, truly do not tolerate folate, it's because of a low serotonin issue. Because weirdly, there's the serotonin transport enzyme that is basically like folate and it have an interaction. And so even though folate ultimately boosts serotonin production, it decreases transport more in the initial phases. And so for people with a really low serotonin level coming into this, taking folate will actually drop that serotonin down before it'll ever help, right? And that's not tolerable for some people. So so in that situation, right, you're taking the methionine or the SAMe, and then serotonin support as well can be really helpful to just kind of get you over that hump to where you can maybe start tolerating a little bit of folinic acid. Okay. Everyone should at least try folinic acid. Even if you're a non-tolerator, try it in a very low dose. Folinic acid does still need MTHFR, but it's way easier to tolerate. B- from Seeking Health is a good product made for MTHFR folks. This is actually inaccurate. So it used to have a small dose of folinic acid, and I think because of the non-tolerator problem, Ben Lynch took it out. So now it has 0 folic acid. It just has supportive B vitamins. But it's still the best starting point, because before you try any of the folates, it's important to try the other Bs, right? And to support that methylation pathway in the other ways that it needs to be supported. So methylation without like B2 isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. So having a deficiency of B2 is just as crippling as having a deficiency of folate in this situation. So B-, tiny dose of folinic acid. If you tolerate that, then we can move on to try 5-LMTHF or folate alternatives, depending on how you do, right? And then the B- gives you the background of all the other B vitamins, because all of them are genuinely necessary somewhere in the folate cycle. And I think I put a picture in. Yeah, I did. So here's the folate and methionine cycle, also stripped down, but you can see every one of those colored circles is a different B vitamin, right? And so they are all represented. Literally every B vitamin is on that page, right? And this is the interplay between how you recycle the methionine to homocysteine back to methionine, how your folate changes and activates to become the 5-LMTHF. And then also, if we're breaking off up here, like the tetrahydrobiopterin salvage pathway, that's where your neurotransmitters come from. And if you look at the bottom, citric acid cycle is where your cellular energy comes from. And then glutathione is your master antioxidant, right? So like this is one of this page is pretty much the foundation of human body functioning. If this isn't happening, yeah, you're not getting anywhere, right? So, yeah, but every B vitamin is represented on this page. We need all of them. And so it's really easy. People get into this loop of like, oh, all I need is folic acid, right? Like, or folate or whatever, because I have MTHFR. Yeah, no, it's not all you need. It's not all you need. Okay, dosing. It should be easy, right? It's not. It's not. Sorry, guys. So for adults, the recommended daily allowance is 400 micrograms of folate, and they actually call it DFEs. Is that right? Yeah, dietary folate equivalents daily. So folic acid counts as slightly more than 1 dietary folate equivalent. So 400 micrograms of folic acid, which is pretty standard in vitamins, is actually already an overdose. Great. The exceptions to this 400 microgram rule are pregnancy, nursing, or high alcohol consumption. So more than 2 drinks daily does actually interfere with folic acid or folate absorption enough that you need to bump up that number. With MTHFR, you do have an ideal dose. It'll probably look really different from that. And it's very different from person to person. Like, there is no way for me to say, oh, you need to shoot for this number. I mean, as a general target, I use the 400 micrograms just, from food sources, especially. But that's probably not your optimal dose for you, particularly. And also, the dose you need or can tolerate will change over time, right? So the dose that you need or tolerate in the beginning could be very, very different from the dose that you tolerate at 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. For me personally, when I first started with 5-LMTHF, I needed a much higher dose than what I would tolerate now. And at some point, that dose started making me like jittery and having the high folate symptoms. And then I just backed down, right? Like, listen to my body and back down. So, and that makes sense, right? Because in the beginning, when you get this, your body hasn't had it in probably however many years that you've been alive, right? Or at least not to any effective degree. And so there's a backlog of work that needs to be done, right? There's all of this detoxifying, there's all kinds of methylating that has just been left undone. And so your body's looking for more of those raw ingredients. But once it starts to clear through the backlog, then, you know, that need kind of decreases. And there's no sense continuing to push, right? Like if you don't need to continue to take it, don't continue to take it. That doesn't make any sense. So as you progress, you will grow into a dosing strategy and you'll kind of learn your body's signals for like not getting enough versus getting too much. But in the beginning, it's kind of important to find a starting dose, just because in the beginning, you're not reading your body in that same way, right? Like you don't have the experience to know what it feels like when you're overdosing versus what it feels like when you're not getting enough. So probably in the beginning, you'll be taking whatever your dose is pretty regularly, right? Like daily, just to help your body catch up, get over that hump. That won't necessarily be the case long-term. And a lot of people get off supplements entirely, right? And end up just eating a good diet, right? And an MTHFR food plan, and they're good, right? That's it, they're done. But in the beginning, most people need extra. So there's 3 different dosing strategies, and really they're all pretty similar. My favorite is intuitive dosing, which basically means understanding your body's symptoms and responding to that, right? So even now, if I get up and I know I've got a stressful day, or I didn't sleep well, or, you know, maybe I'm fighting a little cold, or something's going on where I have a little bit more biological stress, right? Then I am probably going to take 5-LMTHF that morning. The rest of the mornings, forget it. I don't need it. I'm good, right? Like I eat a high folate diet. I'm totally good. I don't need to worry about it. But in the beginning, that was not the case for me. In the beginning, I was taking like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 micrograms a day regularly, because if I didn't, then the wheels would start to come off the cart, right? So intuitive dosing, you're kind of assessing your body at that moment and taking what will help you feel best that day, right? But that requires some knowledge about what your body's actually saying to you, and a little bit of experience in terms of like, this is what it feels when I don't have enough versus this is what it feels like when I have too much. And so that one takes a little while to grow into. But the thing I like about it is it's sort of a combination of symptom meets best response, right? It's not this automatic, like, this is what I do because this is what I do. I don't like those routines, right? Like I don't think that works actually for a dynamic situation like our human body. Ben Lynch does very much the same thing actually, except he explains it very differently. So he says, when you feel best, decrease your dose, and when you feel worse, increase, right? And that's kind of same way, same thing, right? Like the difference is he has more of a strategy about it. So if you read his book or some of his online materials, then, you know, he says like, if you're feeling really great, then you decrease your dose by, you know, X amount, right? Whatever. I think it's cut it in half. And then, you know, continue to lower your dose until you start feeling poorly and then increase again. So same, right? Like it's still responding to your body and responding to how you feel. You can also use a mixed dosing pattern. So some people really like routine, right? And variances to routine are difficult. So if you ask somebody to like actually assess their body every day, that just adds stress and an unnecessary amount of stress. So if you really thrive on routine, it's a really good idea to find a low dose that you know you tolerate really well. And then if you're feeling poorly, add extra. So it just depends on how, you know, what makes sense to you and what sounds like something you can maintain. Okay, we made it through. Who's got questions? And you're probably muted. Let me stop the screen share. If I know how to do that. Okay, so. Let me see what's been going on in the chat, because the chat has been going on. Okay, what's my take on stevia or monk fruit? So sugars and sweeteners are actually a really interesting question that has a lot of factors to it. I like stevia and monk fruit as long as they're actually a part of food, right? And there's other nutrients involved. If there aren't other nutrients involved and it's just like coffee sweetened with stevia, the stevia or the sweetness, right, from whatever source still activates our insulin response. So the insulin response is actually activated by sweet receptors on your tongue. And so even stevia, where there's technically no calories in it, activates that insulin response. And so you're getting an insulin response, but there's no actual sugar coming in. And so then your body has to compensate. And it compensates by releasing stored sugars from your liver, which promotes your body to then store more sugar in your liver, which is also a path towards unhealthy blood sugars. So I don't love artificial sweeteners or non-sugar-based sweeteners of any kind, really, like especially non-caloric. Monk fruit is a little bit better because it does actually have some nutritional value and some calories, right? Like what I'm looking for here is actually just calories, right? And something for your body to do with that insulin once it rises. So stevia is not bad in and of itself, right? Like it's not a chemical, it's nothing that your body needs to detox, there's none of that, but just make sure that if you're using stevia, you're using it with something that has a few calories in it. Coffee is the prime example of a non-caloric something, right? So if you put stevia in coffee, there are no calories, there's only an insulin response. But stevia in like baking, oh, that's fine, there's calories there. We've got calories, we're good. Okay, and Kiri asked, so if we're getting folate from vegetables, legumes, etc., is it best to have it as fresh as possible, for example, not frozen, because the folate degrades? Theoretically, yes. I've never seen a study on how quickly folate does degrade or what happens there. I do know it degrades too quickly to be considered like shelf stable. But I mean, how quickly is that, right? Like, are we talking 10% over, 5 days, or are we talking 100% over 5 days? I don't actually know. I don't know. And I haven't found that information. So I would say probably fresh is better, but, we have to live in the real world too, and it has to be doable and actually achievable. So I would say, do your best in terms of that. If it can't be fresh, that's right? Like we'll all live with it. Okay, are non-dairy milks commonly fortified? So some are, some aren't. Some are and some aren't. I believe silk tends to be, and sorry if I'm maligning silk, I might be inaccurate, but like I know the sort of bigger brands tend to fortify more frequently than the smaller brands, just because it's a selling point. Right. So most people look at the label and they're like, oh, there's more nutrition in there, right? Like this has more things. So yeah, I'll buy that, which is great, but not so good for us. So definitely check the labels, Oh, and then Gary said, Eden and West Soy make an unsweetened soy milk that only has water and soybeans, which is great. Pacific makes an unsweetened, I think, almond milk that's not fortified. Yeah, there's also a brand here in Canada that I think is called something. That's not helpful. It's not helpful at all. Yeah, okay. There's a Canadian brand that doesn't fortify as well. Oh, Kiri says avocado toast goes well with Marmite. I second that opinion. It is so, so good. For those in North America wanting to try yeast bread, I am so behind that. And actually it works really well in a rice cake too. Like just rice cake with butter, Marmite, avocado. Oh, so good. That's my lunch, like probably 4 days out of 7. Yeah. Oh, somebody buys Ripple pea milk. I've not heard of that one, and it's apparently all clear. Whitney says good news, since I just had someone did. Okay. Kiri says, I seem to be able to tolerate 5-LMTHF, taking for about a month, good, and food sources of folate. Should I still try folinic acid? So Kiri, it sounds like you're doing fine with the 5-LMTHF. 5-LMTHF does not actually convert back to folinic acid very easily. It's possible, but not easy for your body. But you are getting the only really good food source that we know of, which is murmite. So probably you're already getting it. I don't think you need to worry too much. I mean, it can be interesting academically. And for some people, folinic acid does really push the neurotransmitter pathways a little bit more than 5-LMTHF does. And so for some people, they do find that supplementing both actually gives them a little bit more results neurotransmitter wise than supplementing just the one. So definitely if there's, you know, if you notice that there's an area in which you're struggling in terms of neurotransmitters, then it can be a good thing to try. But some people really don't notice, right? So it's sort of one of those, like you're already doing 90%, it might be that extra little push. And Kevin Garber says, can you recommend a SAMe brand? Honestly, there's a ton of good ones. The one that I've used previously was from Jarrow. Well, actually, I've used probably a few of them, but the one thing that is important with SAMe, it has to be in the blister packs. For whatever reason, it oxidizes with contact with the air. So it does have to be in a blister pack. But I mean, most of the good manufacturers have figured that out anyway, right? Like it's pretty normal. Enteric coating, I don't love. If you can avoid enteric coating, I would do it simply because, again, it's usually not necessarily a chemical, but something that your body has to process. And so obviously if you need like a slow release pharmaceutical medication, that's a different situation. But for supplements especially, enteric coating can be any damn thing, really. And a lot of times it's like carnauba wax, right? Or something that, you know, it's just, it slows down the process and very often binds to some of the nutrients that we're trying to get. So if you can avoid enteric coating, do that. But there's some situations where you just can't. And the RDA for pregnant and nursing mothers is actually 600 micrograms a day. So for folate. So it does increase pretty significantly when you're pregnant or nursing. And for MTHFR pregnancy and nursing, I tend to go up to 1,000 micrograms if you can, or a milligram, just because I assume there's a little bit of inefficiency in the system, right? And that's if you're a tolerator. If you're not a tolerator, then we have to find a different workaround. Oh, and Stephanie asks, could we describe serotonin support? So a lot of the things that, you know, we hear about all the time, right? Like St. John's wort actually really does boost serotonin to the same degree in a lot of studies that SSRI medications do, right? So something like St. John's wort is a great place to start with serotonin. SAMe itself boosts serotonin. And it just depends on how, you know, serious the situation is with serotonin, whether or not that's going to be enough. Taking melatonin at night boosts serotonin, mostly because melatonin is it's further down in the conversion stream. So serotonin gets converted to melatonin, but melatonin is biologically necessary. So if your serotonin is marginal, you'll still convert some of it to melatonin, even if you don't have a ton of it. Okay. So yeah, taking melatonin can really help support that serotonin pathway. And then there's, you know, there's countless others, like there's whole bunches of products, but yeah, I mean, St. John's wort is a great place to start, honestly. And SAMe. Paula says, should the seeking health supplements be in place before taking anything else, including folate or SAMe? I would try, yes, because the reason I say that is because if you're using a symptom tracker, tracking at each step and giving your body like a little bit of a time to adjust to that step actually does give you a much more accurate picture of your reactions moving forward. And so that helps you to find your ideal dose down the road. So I do really like that time where you've got B vitamins, right? And you're seeing the response from that, but not yet the folate. because folate can throw a wrench into things. And so, you know, and that part, we really want to track symptoms independently. And I think that was the chat.
Amy, can I ask a quick question about folate in the food, natural folate, because I don't take a supplement. But is it useful to actually take, you know, the example you had before was with breakfast, like with avocado. Does it make a difference to then try and get some natural folate throughout the day? So, you know, should you have some in the morning and then maybe some in the evening as well, you know, to sort of like you would with a supplement, you would sort of probably take some in the morning. And yeah.
It's really hard to say. It's pretty difficult. I mean, it's not impossible, but very rarely do you get all 400 micrograms in one meal. Like that takes some pretty serious juggling. So I think it sort of naturally ends up being split through the day.
Right.
But as far as I know, we absorb folate really well. Even, you know, like some supplements you absorb to a certain degree and then absorption tapers off because your body doesn't want to get too much at once. As far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, but as far as I know, folate is not like that. So we can absorb a reasonably high amount at one sitting.
Right. And I've been trying to do my homework and trying to figure out if there's any symptoms I think I feel as a result of, you know, what I'm taking. And I'm finding it really a struggle to try and because of the adrenal fatigue picture clouding, you know, everything. But have you noticed, like one thing I wondered about, so fatigue for me is a difficult thing because that may be coming from the adrenals rather than the MTHFR. But have you noticed with some of your clients, like one thing I wondered about, I actually noticed the other day, I had avocado for lunch, a lot of it. And then I seemed to, like later in the day, talk more to my husband than I would normally. Like I was quite chatty for the rest of the day. And I wondered actually if that could be associated with.
Completely be. Yeah. So my typical.
He'll be hiding the avocados then, I think.
That's right. Yeah. Well, just wait. It can get far worse. But yeah, my typical, like I have had quite a significant dose of folate reaction is the like constant talking while constantly moving. Like I cannot physically stop moving. And so I'm, you know, like wallpapering the wall and talking at the same time.
Multitasking kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's completely dysfunctional and very weird. But yeah, that can absolutely be a sign that you're getting, you know, more of that folate intake, right? It's a response to that folate. And whether or not that's a bad thing, you know.
No, I think it was a good thing. I noticed, you know, because sometimes I've noticed on my supplement eating journey is sometimes, and my own health coach recommends it sometimes it's quite a good idea to push something a wee bit to the extreme if you're feeling comfortable to do that, to sort of test your body's response to something, you know, and then you get a sense of actually what's actually, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, because it really does matter to know your over and under, right? Like, this is too much, this is too little. So somewhere in the middle of there is that sweet spot. But then you also down the road can recognize, right? Like, okay, that was too much right now because the dose is a moving target. It's going to change with time. And so you need to know those too much, too little symptoms so that you know when it is changing, when your dose is changing. So you don't just get stuck in a, like, I don't know why my anxiety is all of a sudden ramped up and it's been bad for a month and I haven't noticed. Yeah, because once you know that over and under, you notice pretty quickly, right? And so that really matters.
So I thought, you know, your advice about finding out what your tells are, you know, what your red flags are was actually really important, but I'm just struggling to find out what mine are. I think
that's definitely a tell that you're on the right track, right? Like your body is doing something with that folate, and that's
and to be honest, that actually felt like a positive thing, not a negative thing.
For sure.
So I'll put that on my list.
Good, very good. Anybody else have something going on or question? Did we do it? Are we
I have a
done?
question.
Oh, tell me.
So I'm just wondering about like how to determine the optimal protein intake. I know we touched on this a little bit during office hours today too, because I also have the MTR
Yeah.
and I'm breastfeeding, so my protein needs to be a little higher. So I'm sort of like, how do I figure out how much is enough?
These questions are so like, yeah, there's no easy answer. So let me back up for people who weren't at the office hours this afternoon, because MTR are genes that interfere with the way you process B12. And the best sources of B12 are meat products, right? Like animal products, animal proteins. And so with the MTR or MTRR, it does actually matter to get more of those sources or to supplement, but I mean, ideally we're getting it from the diet. And then obviously with breastfeeding, yeah, I mean, you just need more protein because you're passing a lot of it on to somebody else, right? Like somebody else is getting all of your good stuff. So, so I would say, honestly, right now, the thing that I believe most truly about pregnancy and nursing is that your body tells you what you need, right? If you are hungry for protein, eat it, right? Don't restrict at this point. Simply because we have a lot of biological mechanisms to protect ourselves during that time, and especially to protect our baby during that time. And so if you're craving a food, yeah, your body actually needs that food, right? Like, and of course there's 1.5 million jokes about pregnant women craving pickles and, you know, weird crap.
Ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. Pickles and ice cream at the same time, simultaneously, which is true, right? And that's a thing that happens. But it is also a time when you really do have to listen to your body and listen to your cravings. So if you're hungry for proteins, if you're hungry for, or if you're hungry for carbs, if you're hungry for whatever you're hungry for, just eat that, right? Unless it's something that, you know, it's like, okay, I'm hungry for, you know, jelly beans. Yeah, that's
Sugar.
probably the thing, right? And I mean, hungry for sugar, so it has an upside and a downside. Hungry for sugar does mean your body needs more energy, right? And that's a clear signal, and that's something to listen to. But it's probably best not to give energy in the quickest and most ridiculous form possible, right? Like, so, you know, don't go directly for the gummy bears, just, you know, bypass that step a little bit. So, yeah. Does that make any sense? I'm sorry. Again,
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Because that's what I've been doing. And I was vegan for a really long time before I got pregnant. And suddenly I was like, I need to eat meat, which I haven't eaten in a long time. So I've just been going with that. And this was new news to me that I should be even thinking about having too much protein being a problem. But like, that's just not where I am in my life right now. And
yeah, right now, not the time. Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, perfect. Anybody else have questions? Okay. All right. I'm going to screen share again really briefly and just talk about, if you're following along with the food plan, we've got some to-dos this week. And actually, even if you're not following along with the food plan, there's some things to do. So this week's challenge, boost those food sources of natural folate if you're doing the food part, right? If you're doing this, make sure you're using your symptom tracker. I do want you to keep track of how you actually feel with those foods, right? And it could be good changes, it could be bad changes, but we need to know if there are changes. So make sure that you're really utilizing that symptom tracker to its fullest. And then also, I want you to do a protein audit just to see, you know, because some people really, like, we have this vague cultural idea that we need to boost protein without actually realizing how much of it we're really getting on a daily basis. So, so it's kind of nice to do a check-in. There's a little bit of math, sorry about that, guys. But it can be nice to just check in on that and see sort of what your averages are and how you're doing. And that's it. That's it. Next week we start on detox. And detox is super fun to talk about. So it's one of my favorites. I love detox. Oh yeah, geekery. So that's coming up. Super excited about that. And if you have any questions, we'll figure out a good time for office hours. Does anybody have a time or date preference while we're here and thinking about it? No. Okay, we'll work something out. We'll work something out. So yeah, I'll figure out, I can't remember what our polled times were, but there was maybe another one, like a 3 p.m. Eastern time worked out for a couple of different time zones. So so I might actually try that one next time, and I'll just have to figure out a day. So, okay, guys,
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks for
Bye.
being here. Have a good night. Bye.